It's the Real News Network, and I'm Greg Wilpert in Baltimore. The government of Argentina, together with major transnational oil companies, is working on a plan to double its production of oil and natural gas via hydraulic fracturing, or fracking as it's commonly known. The plan, though, has been running into trouble recently. Workers at a fracking sand production mine went on strike, demanding a doubling of their wages. Also, the recently elected government of Alberto Fernandez introduced price freezes for fuel to help bring inflation under control, but this has affected investment in the fracking sector. Still, the project moves forward as the world's second most important fracking effort after the United States. Argentina's fracked oil and gas production raises serious issues, however, about the effect it will have on climate change and indigenous land, just as it does in the United States. The Vaca Muerta shale has attracted transnational oil companies such as ExxonMobil, Francis Total, Shell, and Chevron. Also, the Trump administration is supporting this project, recently providing a $450 million loan via the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. Joining me now to discuss Argentina's fracking boom is Nick Cunningham. He's a Portland, Oregon-based independent reporter who recently returned from a week-long reporting trip to Argentina. His investigation resulted in a series of articles, the third installment of which was written for the Real News Network and is titled Surviving the Onslaught of Fracking in Argentina. Good to have you on, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with some of the basic background information. Where is the Vaca Muerta shale located in Argentina, and why has it emerged as the second most important commercially viable country in the world for fracking?
Yeah, so the Vaca Muerta shale formation, which is part of the Neuquén Basin, is located in sort of central Argentina, a little bit east of the Andes, in a dry part of the country. It's an arid steppe and in northern Patagonia. And the reason it's important is because it has, the US EIA estimates that it has the second largest shale gas reserves in the world and the fourth largest shale oil reserves in the world. So after the United States, actually, in terms of gas, it's estimated to have more gas reserves than the United States. So the geologic potential is massive, and the Argentine government wants to take advantage of that. And unlike some other countries, say China, which also has a lot of estimated shale reserves, the Argentine government is very actively courting multinational oil companies to come in and to develop this. So it's a little bit slow going, but in the last few years, it's sort of picked up momentum.
Now, President Alberto Fernandez, who came to office in December, specifically aimed to reverse many of the neoliberal policies of his predecessor, Mauricio Macri. Now, how does the Fernandez administration view the shale project and fracking as a policy matter?
This is a good question, and in a lot of ways, there's continuity. Last year, during the campaign, after Alberto Fernandez won in their version of a primary in August, and he was sort of the presumed president in waiting, there was big questions over what he was going to do with Vaca Muerta. And the industry was concerned that he was going to re-intervene in the market, which would sort of be bad for them. But he didn't say much in the next few months. He made a couple cryptic statements about the state needing more control, but he didn't say much. And as time went on and he won the presidency and he assumed office, it became clear that he very much wants this to happen. There's going to be some nuance and some tweaking of the policy, but the Argentine government, now under Alberto Fernandez, still wants to develop fracking. And so this is kind of interesting because in the English-speaking press, in English language press, there's often it's often framed as the Peronists are sort of anti-market and Macri was very pro-market. But while there's differences and Alberto Fernandez wants a little bit more of a state role, they still promote extractive industries. And it's just a little bit more of a state-led approach. And so now he enters 2020 in the midst of an economic crisis, and he's positioning Vaca Muerta as a key part of the country's economic revival.
Now, your article for us focuses on the impact that fracking is having within indigenous communities in Argentina. Those include both the human rights impacts and also the potential impacts on drinking water as well as earthquakes. Tell us about that, and also about who you talked to while you were there.
Yeah, so the flagship oil field for Vaca Muerta, and one of the most important oil fields at this point in South America, is called Loma Campana, and it's in the province of Neuquén, and it is a joint venture between YPF, which is the state-owned oil company, partially state-owned, and Chevron, the American oil giant. And so this field, this Loma Campana field, is located on ancestral lands for the Mapuche indigenous communities, particularly one community called Campo Maripe. They lived there for decades, at least a century. But the state and the province dispute that fact, saying that they don't have land title. But obviously they were there before Neuquén was even a province. Nevertheless, the Argentine state permitted this and approved it. And YPF and Chevron proceeded, and that required evicting Mapuche communities from this land. Now they still live. They've kind of been pushed off onto pushed to the side from this field, and they live below the plateau, kind of in the industry shadow. And there's a lot of negative outcomes from this. I met with them, and they said that they've had various health problems, respiratory problems, skin rashes, some cancers. Especially, there's one case of a child getting cancer. They had drinking water problems. They now have to buy water, which is a really a big hardship for a community that doesn't have a lot of money. Their animals have been sick. Some were born with deformities, and they can't graze them as much anymore. And so the living in the industry shadow is very negative for them. Now, further down, a little bit further down the main highway, there's another town called Salzal Bonito, and this is a very small village, and it's sort of in the epicenter of a sudden wave of earthquakes. And I spoke with a geographer from the university there in Neuquén, who said that there's no precedent for earthquakes in this area. And since the onset of fracking, there's been a huge spike in earthquakes, particularly in the past year. And it's not fracking per se that causes the earthquakes. It's these disposal wells. When all this water comes out of the ground, they have to re-inject that water back into the ground in deeper wells. And it's these disposal wells that are thought to be causing some earthquakes. And in this small town, some houses had some severe damage from earthquakes. I saw and took pictures of cracks in walls. And there's one house that fell to the ground. And I spoke with a woman who described living in fear because of this happens. They wake up in the middle of the night and their children are crying, and the earthquakes are rattling their houses. They're old adobe houses, so she's scared that they're going to fall down, and one did. So the earthquakes is another problem in this area.
Now, the second article in your series also highlighted the infrared camera shots that showed methane emissions in the Vaca Muerta shale. What exactly are the risks associated with that and with climate change, and especially considering that they're ramping up drilling in this field? And what does the movement against this drilling in Argentina look like? It's an important context is that the global oil majors have sort of committed to the Paris Climate Agreement, at least, ostensibly, I'm putting that in quotes. They've committed to the principles of the Paris Climate Agreement. Nevertheless, in the past 2 years, they spent at least $50 billion on new projects that are out of alignment with Paris. And that data comes from Carbon Tracker. So, and they have another $1.5 trillion in the works on new oil and gas projects. So what does that mean? That means that they're actively betting against, they're assuming and betting against that the world will get serious about climate change. They're very much invested in the world blowing past climate targets. Now, Argentina is one of these places that they are investing in. And Argentina, by all accounts, is at the very early stages of this fracking story. The U.S. has been doing this for a decade and a half,
And Argentina has been doing a lot of pilot projects, and they're only in the early stages of ramping up. So the oil majors involved in Argentina have no plans of slowing down. They plan to be there for decades, and they plan to drill thousands of wells and essentially do what they did in the U.S. So this is a big climate problem because we already have, some research suggests that all of the existing production will use up the carbon budget, and we essentially can't be developing new frontiers for oil. And some of the activists that I spoke with referred to this as a carbon bomb, the amount of carbon that's in the ground in Argentina. One study suggested that it's equivalent to about 11% of the remaining carbon budget. And so the climate impacts are profound, but the story's not written yet. This is still early stages. As far as what the resistance to what's going on there, it's pretty weak, to be honest. The national government as I mentioned, is very much in support. The provincial government is very much in support. And in Buenos Aires, which is very far from, hundreds of miles away from where the joint is taking place, the press reports on Vaca Muerta in almost uniformly positive ways. And so there isn't a big resistance in Buenos Aires where much of the population lives. So the resistance is really on the ground in Neuquén and Rio Negro provinces. And it's small, but it's actually pretty interesting. There's a group, the indigenous communities and Mapuche communities work with environmentalists. They work with academics in the city of Neuquén. And there's a lot of information sharing. I met a geographer who was in the town where all those earthquakes were, explaining to the residents about the risks. So there is a small but a sort of cross-community movement to slow the industry's advancement.
Well, I certainly hope we can get your stories out, not only internationally, but also within Argentina, and maybe they can be translated so that people become more informed about this project, because as you said, it seems like there's very little information about this. But we're going to leave it there for now and encourage people to read your articles, both in the Desmog blog and also on our website. I'm speaking to Nick Cunningham, freelance journalist and author of the TRNN article, Surviving the Onslaught of Fracking in Argentina. Thanks again, Nick, for having joined us today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.